Madam Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 953, I call up the bill H.R. 6136, the Border Security and Immigration Reform Act, and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 6136, a bill to amend the immigration laws and provide for border security and for other purposes.
The bill, pursuant to House Resolution 953, the bill is considered as read. The bill is considered read. The bill shall be debatable for 1 hour with 40 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary, and 20 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Homeland Security. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte, and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, each will control 20 minutes. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, and the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, each will control 10 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials to H.R. 6136.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Michael McCall, Carlos Curbelo, Jeff Denham, and I introduced H.R. 6136 to be a consensus bill designed to bring members together. It is the product of fruitful negotiations and will offer us a path forward towards true immigration reform. As with the Securing America's Future Act, this bill provides a legislative resolution of DACA, which was imposed through an unconstitutional abuse of executive power by President Obama. But in addition to a renewable legal status, this bill expands relief to those who were eligible for DACA but never applied. Many did not apply because they thought that DACA was simply unconstitutional. H.R. 6136 also creates a merit-based green card program that the recipients of the bill's contingent non-immigrant status can apply for. This program is the first ever point system based on education, vocational training, apprenticeship, employment experience, English proficiency, and military service under U.S. immigration law. Aliens with similar life experiences to DACA recipients can also apply. Those who were brought to the U.S. as minors by parents on temporary work visas and grew up in the U.S. All other DACA legislation that I am aware of discriminates against such persons simply because they and their parents haven't violated our laws. To be clear, there is no special path to citizenship for DACA recipients or DACA-eligible individuals. Importantly, this bill will help ensure that the DACA dilemma does not recur after a few short years. As with H.R. 4760, it will end catch and release, battle asylum fraud, and require that unaccompanied minors caught at the border be treated equally regardless of their home country. As with H.R. 4760, it will ensure that the law no longer tempts minors and their parents to make the dangerous, illegal journey to the United States or to line the pockets of cartels. We must turn off the irresistible jobs magnet if we are ever to effectively deal with illegal immigration. While expansion of the hugely successful E-Verify program is not contained in H.R. 6136, I am pleased that leadership has committed to bringing such legislation to the floor this summer. As with H.R. 4760, the bill will make it easier to deport gang members who are aggravated felons or who have multiple DUIs. H.R. 6136 modernizes our legal immigration system. It will reduce extended family chain migration and terminate the diversity visa program, which awards green cards by random lottery to people with no ties to the United States. It reduces overall immigration numbers over the long term and shifts to a first-in-line visa system by eliminating the per-country cap on employment-based green cards. The bill begins a shift to a merit-based system by establishing the new merit-based green card program that I described. As with H.R. 4760, the bill corrects the disastrous Flores settlement to ensure that minors apprehended at the border with their parents are not separated from their parents when the parents are placed in DHS custody. Importantly, H.R. 6136 addresses family separation in light of the zero tolerance prosecution initiative by mandating that DHS, not DOJ, maintain the custody of aliens charged with illegal entry along with their children. This would only apply to those who enter the country with children and would not permit those charged with felonies or any other criminal activity to be detained along with children. The bill allocates funding for family detention space to facilitate this requirement. Congress has a unique opportunity to act now, before the country ends up with another large population who crossed the border illegally as children. Let's take this historic moment to come together and support vital legislation that provides common sense, reasonable solutions. I urge my colleagues to join President Trump and support this important legislation.
The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I strongly oppose H.R. 6136. Far from being the moderate and compromised bill that has been advertised, this bill is extreme and unreasonable. This bill eliminates the diversity visa program and cuts off even children and brothers and sisters from reunifying with their families. The bill even revokes the approval of over 3 million family members who have been waiting for years to reunify with their U.S. citizen brothers, sisters, and parents. While it claims to end President Trump's cruel family separation policy, nothing in the bill actually prohibits family separation or limits criminal prosecutions. And the bill requires the long-term detention of families and children, while actually removing requirements that detention facilities be safe, sanitary, and appropriate for children. It eliminates important asylum protections and would prevent many bona fide asylum seekers from even applying for protection in the first place. In addition, this legislation spends $23.4 billion to fund Donald Trump's offensive and unnecessary border wall. Finally, and most importantly, this bill fails to provide a certain path to citizenship for the Dreamers. Donald Trump created havoc when he made the decision to strip legal status from young Americans who were brought to the U.S. as young children and who know only this country as their home. The Republican leadership repeatedly announced that they intended to protect the Dreamers. Now we see their supposed solution, and it is a half measure at best that leaves far too many Dreamers behind. The bill's stringent eligibility requirements would likely cut off millions of Dreamers from eligibility for the bill's legalization program. For those who would be eligible, the bill establishes a long and difficult road to permanent residence, never mind to citizenship. Because of the limited number of visas made available, it would force applicants to wait for up to 23 years. 23 years for permanent residence. Most galling, if even $1 of border wall funding is ever transferred or rescinded by a future Congress, the long and difficult path to permanent residence would be canceled entirely. This would effectively hold the Dreamers hostage to every future appropriations battle. Now, we know the Republicans refer to this bill as a compromise, but it's not a compromise. When you excluded the Democrats from negotiations, there is, in fact, a compromise bipartisan bill, the Hurd-Aguilar bill, that actually provides a meaningful path to citizenship for Dreamers and doesn't bog the bill down in different considerations about the wall or about diversity visas or about family legislation. Those are separate issues and should be debated separately if you want to redeem your promise to the Dreamers. This bill is hypocritical because it doesn't redeem the promise to the Dreamers and bogs it down in other issues which we know will probably result in the bills never going anywhere. Do not be fooled by this legislation. It is not moderate. It is not a compromise. It does not solve the Dreamer issue. It reflects the Republican majority's decision to keep a real Dreamer bill, the Hurd-Aguilar bill, off the floor. It is yet one more extreme measure by the Republican majority that fails to solve the real issues plaguing our immigration system and betrays the promise to the Dreamers. I urge all members to oppose this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, at this time, it's my pleasure to yield 3 minutes to the Gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Handel, a member of the Judiciary Committee.
The gentlewoman from Georgia is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Earlier today, I voted in support of the Goodlatte-McCall bill, and I stand here today in support of H.R. 6136. This bill is a common-sense measure that addresses many aspects of our broken immigration system. It will end the lawlessness at the U.S.-Mexico border while also providing thoughtful and compassionate solutions to protect children at the border. Specifically, this bill will finally secure our borders, which is critical to national security. It provides $25 billion in advanced funding for the border barrier system, more Border Patrol personnel, and surveillance technology. That's advanced funding. That does not happen very often here in Congress. This bill also includes much needed measures to curb visa overstays. It limits extended family migration, eliminates lottery visas, deters sanctuary cities, and addresses asylum fraud. Further, H.R. 6136 establishes a new framework for DACA individuals. This framework is sensible and, again, compassionate, long-term solution that allows for legal residency through competitive merit-based process. Importantly, the DACA provisions are contingent on the actual deployment of money and resources for that border wall system and the other border security measures. While this bill is not perfect, because few things are, it does represent a significant and meaningful step forward in fixing our immigration system. Madam Speaker, the status quo is simply unacceptable. We are long past the time for rhetoric, posturing, and politics. The American people deserve better. It is time for real solutions, and that's exactly what this bill offers. It's time for Congress to act. Let's pass this bill. With that, I yield back, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I now yield 3 minutes to the distinguished ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lofgren.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I think it's important that we be honest about why we're here today. Every major problem in this bill that this bill purports to tackle was actually created by President Trump himself. First, there's Trump's policy of ripping children away from their parents. He issued an order last night purporting to address this issue, but we would not need to address it in legislation if it weren't for his misguided policies. And I will point out that his remedy appears to be the same one that's in this bill, which is to put the mothers in the cages with the toddlers and to incarcerate whole families. Then we have the DACA program that President Trump chose to terminate. He says he cares about dreamers, but it was his own decision that created the present danger to these young Americans in waiting. And finally, we have the asserted need to change our asylum laws to make it almost impossible to qualify and to authorize the prolonged detention of asylum-seeking families with children to ensure compliance with the law. As I mentioned during the discussion of the rule, this is not necessary. We had a program called the Family Case Management Program that, according to the Inspector General for the Homeland Security Department, resulted in a 100% attendance rate at immigration court proceedings. And that's, in fact, what we need. We need attendance at the court hearing, and if a person prevails, they will be granted asylum. If they fail, they will be removed. What we need here is the orderly processing and application of immigration law instead of the chaos that President Trump has brought to us. I'd like to point out that this program costs $36 a day compared to over $700 a day to put a child in one of those cages. Now, those aren't my figures. Those are from DHS. You know, we don't need this legislation. We need the president to take action. He can do what needs to be done today by picking up the phone. Now, he's backed off temporarily, maybe, because of public pressure, but he has not addressed the issue of the Dreamers. You know, I don't know what the word "a special path" means, but there's a new path for Dreamers in this bill. However, as has been mentioned by Mr. Nadler, for some it could take as long as 23 years. And so if you're 27 years old now, by the time you are able to apply and receive U.S. citizenship, you'd be 55 years of age. I think that's a ridiculous proviso, especially as we have all acknowledged, these are young people who are Americans in every capacity, but for their, may I have an additional 30 seconds?
I yield the gentlelady an additional 30 seconds.
Gentlewoman's recognized for 30 seconds.
I would just like to say, I think that the president has taken the Dreamers, little children, the asylum-seeking families as hostages for the anti-immigrant provisions in this bill. It's been mentioned that we have a generous immigration system. To whom? 2/3 of the visas go to the immediate nuclear family of Americans. So that's what we want. There's been a lot of, to eliminate the ability of Americans to have their sons and daughters with them is simply wrong. We should vote against this disaster of a bill, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
I'm just sitting here waiting. Madam Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes. 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, member of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Johnson.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our job as legislators is to listen to each other and find common ground to compromise for the good of the American people. Today, Trump Republicans are trying to do comprehensive immigration reform without any committee hearings, with Democrats, with no consultation. This is a spectacle, trying to pass legislation on such an important subject in such a haphazard and slipshod manner. Congress can certainly do better than this, and the American people deserve better than this. Never again should these Trump Republicans ever claim that they adhere to regular order. The integrity of our process in this House depends upon careful consideration of bills through regular order, so that only thoughtful legislation is passed. In our consideration of important legislation, the debate and the ability to compromise are essential. Sadly, I fear that we've lost the ability to engage in honest debate, and we've lost the will to compromise. Though the ability to compromise is important, we Democrats can't agree to lock up children in cages. We can't agree to a bill that leaves dreamers behind. Compromise does not allow us to turn our backs to asylum seekers, or to stop family immigration, or to kill the diversity visa program, or waste billions of dollars building Trump's border wall. This bill does all those things. We have a national crisis on our hands, and as we speak, 2,300 children have been torn away from the arms of their parents at the U.S.-Mexican border, and it's our job to remedy this disgrace and reunite these families. I urge you not to support the Border Security and Immigration Reform Act. A bipartisan solution is out there, but clearly this bill is not it. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as may consume. I just want to say there are complaints that this is not a bipartisan bill, and yet we address the issues that Democrats express concern about. We have a very good way to address the DACA population in this legislation, and yet when we look to the other side for help with securing our border, with taking the current fencing, and if you've ever been along that border, particularly in San Diego, where they have a very high fence, but all it is a fence, you can take a a saw, an electric saw, and cut through that in a matter of seconds and be on the other side. But where's the help for addressing those kind of security measures? I don't see it. We have addressed in this legislation the family separation issue in a very good way. We agree families should be unified if it's simply a matter of a misdemeanor charge that the parents are facing. We want the children to be detained with them. But where is the help that we get from the other side in terms of addressing problems like catch and release, problems like asylum fraud, problems like unaccompanied minor status, where we have a disparity between how we handle unaccompanied minors coming across the border from Canada or Mexico who are Canadian or Mexican, but if they've come from somewhere else in the world through Canada or Mexico, we can't treat them the same way. All of those things are addressed in this bill. We are addressing the concerns of the American people on how to address immigration reform through the 4 pillars. Making sure we do something appropriate for the DACA population, including opportunities not for a special pathway to citizenship, but to ultimately attain citizenship if they earn it. And we are also addressing the other 3 categories: border security and closing the loopholes in our laws, ending the visa lottery and moving to a merit-based immigration system, and moving towards a family-based immigration system that is the nuclear family, your spouse and your children, not extended family members. I don't see anything addressing most of that coming from any legislation from the Democrats, and I certainly would welcome seeing their proposals on what they would do for a wall and fencing and other security measures along our border. I'd be very interested in seeing what they do to help us move from an overwhelmingly family-based immigration system to one that is a merit-based system. You know, countries like Canada and the United Kingdom and Australia, they give their immigrant visas in 50, 60, 70% of their cases based upon education, job skills, job offers, training, and we are at 12%. That is unacceptable. This bill moves us in the right direction. I urge my colleagues to support it, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself 30 seconds. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, the President of the United States and the Speaker of the House promised to solve the problem of the Dreamers and to give them a path to citizenship. This bill does not do that except for 23 years, and it makes them hostage to other things, such as the gentleman from Georgia talked about. We do not agree, many of us, that we should go away from family-based unification. We do not agree on the 4 pillars. The President agrees with that. Some of the Republicans agree with that. We ought to debate that separately and have a bill that takes care of the Dreamers as the President and the Speaker promised, instead of holding them hostage to all these other things that we don't agree to and that shouldn't be held hostage. We should have a clean DACA bill like
the gentleman's time has expired.
Heard Aguilar. Thank you. I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to the bill proposed by Speaker Ryan. A day after the big lie was finally admitted to by President Trump, the Attorney General, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the resident White House sociopath Stephen Miller, that ripping children from their mothers and fathers and jailing them was solely an administrative decision, not a law, not a loophole, not the fault of Democrats, but instead the singular, cynical, and cruel policy of the Trump administration. Yet H.R. 6136 does nothing to remedy the damage of that policy for children, for their parents, and does nothing to soothe the conscience of a nation. H.R. 6136 has no oversight or public review of for-profit and nonprofit detention centers, nothing to reunite 2,300 children with their families, eliminates the standards of care for children in detention centers. Today was supposed to be about DACA recipients. This bill does nothing for them either. Their fate is tied to spending $23 billion of taxpayer dollars on a political gift to Trump for a wall that circumvents environmental law, puts our lands, water, and wildlife and borderland communities at risk. A point system that would could disqualify over 80% of current and previously eligible Dreamers. We had an opportunity to address Dreamers. By the way, another Trump-created crisis, with a vote on the Aguilar-Hurd legislation, a bipartisan compromise that includes some content I opposed, but I would vote for it because it's necessary and a step forward. But this effort was sabotaged by Trump and the Republican leadership of this House. We are now asked to vote on Speaker Ryan H.R. 3136, the Anti-Family Values Bill. It's wasteful, repressive, and meaningless. Regardless of how you paint it, how you sell it, or lie about it, this particular pig will never be a silk purse. I yield back, and I urge a no vote on the legislation.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, at this time, it's my pleasure to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 6136, the Border Security and Immigration Reform Act, and I thank Chairman Goodlatte for allowing me to spend time talking about this from a personal perspective. I represent the 17th District of Texas, which has a number of colleges, universities, and institutions of higher education that are home to hundreds of Dreamers that are studying to improve their lives. I believe that we should give them a path to come out of the shadows by providing them with an earned path to legal status. These Dreamers were brought here by their parents as children, and for most, America is the only home they know. Further, they did not commit the crimes to enter the country illegally, and to characterize an earned path to legal status as amnesty is an offense to their character and to the hard work this body has done to try to come to a consensus. This bill is also important because it will ensure that children that are apprehended at the border will not be separated from their parents or legal guardian while in DHS custody. Look, we all know that enforcing the law is important, both for the integrity of our immigration system and out of respect for the thousands of law-abiding immigrants who come to this country legally every year, many of whom reside in my district. The President was right to issue an executive order to stop the separation of children from their parents. As I've said before, only Congress can enact a permanent solution that amends current law, which has flaws and loopholes, and overturns current legal precedents set by the courts. This bill includes 4 pillars which were previously agreed on by Democrats and Republicans in the White House a few months ago. It deals with border security. It comes up with a solution for the Dreamers. It gets rid of a visa lottery, which has not been helpful for merit-based immigration in this country. And it reforms chain migration so that we can bring in the immigrants that we need that will be an integral part of the economy in day one. In closing, Madam Speaker, I will note that we cannot move forward without enacting strong border security reforms, and I'm pleased that the solutions for our Dreamers that this bill puts forward are coupled with funding to strengthen border security. We can't have one without the other. Robust border security includes a border wall where feasible. Robust border security can only be achieved through an integrated system of border technology, personnel, and the modernization of our ports of entry. This bill rightly authorizes all of those components and funds those components. I urge a yes vote from all of our colleagues on this bill, and I appreciate the time, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. And Madam Speaker, I rise today in strong opposition to this Republican-only compromise immigration bill. The only thing that is compromised in this legislation is America's source of strength as a nation of immigrants. This bill guts asylum protections for those fleeing danger and dashes the hopes of legal immigrants seeking to reunite with family members. It continues this presidential Ponzi scheme of forcing taxpayers to buy an expensive but useless border wall that Trump promised Mexico would pay for. As a mother, and frankly as a human being, this bill makes my stomach turn. Despite Republican crocodile tears, this bill doesn't put an end to the Trump administration's child abuse, and our innocent dreamers would be forced to navigate a confusing path to citizenship that could take 20 years. Just like with taxes and health care, Republicans just refuse to reach across the aisle to address our nation's challenges. The president put children on our borders in fenced cages, and Americans were revolted. With this bill, Republicans in Congress are about to put Lady Liberty in a fenced cage, which would be equally revolting. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, may I inquire how much time is remaining on each side?
Each side has 7½ minutes remaining.
That's fair. I reserve.
Gentleman from Virginia reserves.
I now yield 1½ minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Roybal Allard.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1½ minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to this cruel partisan effort that does nothing to stop family separation, address the crises of children already separated from their parents, nor does it fairly address the plight of dreamers. Instead of uniting families, it eliminates the ability of U.S. citizens to sponsor parents, adult children, and siblings. And it abandons 3 million family members waiting to legally enter our country. This bill limits access to asylum and eliminates provisions that protect children and their right to seek refuge in our country. It excludes thousands of dreamers, has no guarantee of citizenship, and does nothing to remove the uncertainty and fear dreamers have of deportation away from family and the only country they know as home. Madam Speaker, this bill is a sham. It authorizes prolonged detentions, funds Trump's border wall, militarizes our borders, weakens child protection laws, and erodes our American tradition of uniting families. I urge my colleagues to vote against this irresponsible bill. I yield back.
And yields back. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1½ minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Davis.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I led my colleagues in a letter to Secretaries Nielsen and Azar asking about plans to reunify the thousands of children separated from their parents. Neither the President's executive order nor the bills before us address the crises facing these traumatized children. The American people deserve to know how and when the detained children will be returned to their parents. What is the plan to reunite children with their loved ones? What are the agencies doing to ensure this reunification? Are they guaranteeing that family members who come forward will not be at risk of deportation themselves? Shouldn't these questions be at the heart of any legislation we consider? Otherwise, it becomes a priority to build a wall instead of solving these overriding humanitarian crises. This administration continues to create problems and then scrambles to shift blame after public outcries. We saw it with the Muslim ban. We saw it with DACA. And now these children are the latest victims. This Congress should have zero tolerance for intolerance. I look forward, Mr. Speaker, to hearing back from DHS and HHS and urge my colleagues to vote no on this inadequate
Gentleman's
bill.
time's expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I continue to reserve.
The reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Lewis.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my good friend, Mr. Nadler, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise with a heavy heart to oppose this mean-spirit bill. Heavy because the House does nothing to stop family from being torn apart or locked behind cases, behind bars. Heavy because you still won't bring a Clean Dream Act to the floor. Heavy because you do nothing to stop this administration's assault on immigrants' families and communities. The world is watching with shame and disgust. The late Ethel Randolph, the Dean of Black Leadership during the 60s, reminded us that we may have come to this great land in different ships, but we all are in the same boat now. And just 3 short years ago, the Pope reminded this body to do unto others as you will have them to do unto you. Mr. Speaker, enough is enough. The very soul of our nation is at stake, and time is running out. The moral question is simple. Mr. Speaker, will you lead or will you follow? Will you bring a bipartisan, compassionate bill to the floor? Will we show the nation and the world that we respect human rights and the dignity of every man, woman, and child? Mr. Speaker, will you offer your brothers and sisters a life vest, or will you let them drown? We can do better as a nation and as a people. Will you be a headlight? Will you be a headlight? Will you lead? Will you be compassionate? And look out for all of our citizens. Look out for the dreamers. Look out for the little children, the mothers and the fathers. The choice and responsibility are yours, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I continue to reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
1 minute. He's California, right? Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Costa.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this Republican partisan bill. Just a few days ago, I traveled to San Diego with several of our colleagues to see firsthand how current immigration policy is being enforced. There were children separated from their parents and migrants seeking asylum. Our immigration system is broken, and everybody knows that. And this administration is making a challenging situation worse. Our immigration system needs to be dealt with. Why don't we try sitting down and working together on real bipartisan reform? This is a partisan proposal that holds dreamers and vulnerable children hostage and does nothing for California farm workers. What's worse, it builds a $25 billion wall that by itself does not provide comprehensive solutions for our border security, which we all believe in. By the way, didn't the president promise that Mexico would pay for this wall? I urge my colleagues to do the right thing. Vote no. Let's get back to working on bipartisan reform. Reform that provides us with border security we need and fixes our immigration system and respects the dignity and the humanity of aspiring Americans. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I continue to reserve.
The gentleman from Virginia reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized. Thanks.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to close, but before I do, I have a parliamentary inquiry. Will the House vote on this measure tonight?
Chair cannot comment on the legislative schedule.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
The chair cannot comment on the legislative schedule.
Will the House vote tomorrow?
The chair cannot comment on the legislative schedule.
Can the chair advise when the House will vote on this measure?
The chair cannot comment on the legislative schedule.
Under the rule, the minority, the Democrats, are entitled to offer one final amendment in the form of a motion to recommit. When will we have that opportunity?
Entertaining debate on the bill at this time.
We normally have that opportunity during debate. Will we have that opportunity in debate tonight?
Chair is entertaining debate on the bill.
I understand that. Will we have the opportunity as part of that debate to offer the amendment in the form of a motion to recommit, as is our right during debate?
Under the rule for consideration of this bill, one motion to recommit is available.
And so I take it that we will be able to offer that motion to recommit before we finish debate tonight?
Is currently entertaining debate on the bill.
You didn't answer my question, sir. We are, of course, entertaining debate on the bill now. The motion to recommit is part of that debate, and my question is, will we be permitted to offer that motion to recommit before we finish debate tonight?
After the hour of debate on this bill has expired, there may be the possibility.
I can't hear you.
After the hour of debate on this bill has expired, there may be an opportunity for a motion to recommit.
There may be. If the chair can't answer, perhaps the chairman of the committee can answer that question about the motion to recommit, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yield.
I will yield.
I don't control the floor schedule, so I can't answer the gentleman's question as to the timing of when the gentleman's opportunity to offer a motion to recommit, which the rules provide for, will be afforded to him. I don't know the answer to that.
Can the chairman perhaps comment on when the House will vote on this bill?
Again, I don't control the floor, and I don't have any direct advice on when that will take place.
Mr. Chairman, for what purpose are we debating this bill tonight if we cannot guarantee when or if we will vote? Well, let me rephrase the question. Can the chair guarantee that we will, in fact, vote on this bill at some point?
Asking the chairman of the committee, or?
I'm asking the acting speaker right now. I think the mace is up, says speaker.
Yeah, the chairman just reiterated that the chair is entertaining debate on this bill.
Well, we are entertaining debate on the bill, obviously, but can you guarantee that we will, in fact, vote on this bill at some point? Otherwise, why are we wasting time?
The chair will not advise on the future legislative schedule.
Well, can you guarantee that we will have the opportunity, as guaranteed under the rules, to offer our motion to recommit, whether or not we ever vote on this bill?
The chair would reiterate that the rule does provide one motion to recommit.
But the chair will not guarantee that the rule will be adhered to and give us the opportunity to offer that motion.
Chair is entertaining debate on the bill.
Okay. The chair is being very forthcoming. I do assume that we will have the opportunity to offer our motion to recommit. I further assume that at some point we will vote on this bill. Otherwise, everything the majority has said about why it's being offered would be a little less than honest. I will now close. I yield myself the balance of my time. Mr. Speaker, this supposed compromise bill is a sham. It fails to cover all dreamers or to provide them with a certain path to citizenship. It fails to end the Trump family separation policy. It revokes critical protections for detained children and families. It eliminates important asylum protections. It makes communities less safe. And it slashes legal family immigration. At every step of the way, this bill attacks family unity, attacks immigrant communities, and attacks common decency. And it evades fulfilling the pledge of the Speaker and the President that we will do something about, that we will solve the problem and allow a path to citizenship for the dreamers. I urge all members to oppose the bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, for the purpose of closing on our side, I yield the balance of our time to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Curbelo.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the distinguished chairman. The reason I'm here, Mr. Chairman, is because I made a commitment to my constituents and really to the country that I wanted to improve our country's immigration system. If you look at the reality of what's happening today, it's really sad. We have a chaotic situation at the border. We have drug traffickers active at the border, bringing in their drugs, poisoning the American people. We have human traffickers, which are exploiting some of the most vulnerable people in the world, profiting off of them. Some of these children that get brought over by coyotes get abused, molested, raped. This is what's happening at our southwest border, and it has to change. The underlying bill invests in border security, and most Americans, an overwhelming majority, want to see the situation at the border improve. And an overwhelming majority believes that the United States of America, like every country in the world, has the right and the duty to enforce its laws and to protect its borders. I'm also here, Mr. Speaker, because I made a commitment to some of the victims of our broken immigration system. There are a lot of young immigrants in our country who were brought over as children. Some of them have no memory of their countries of origin. They are the victims of a broken immigration system. Some of these young people, I know their stories because I know them well. When they're 14 or 15, they discover that they're undocumented. After years of having sat in classrooms with our own kids, pledging allegiance to our own flag, and loving this country just as much as we do. And that's why this bill contains a solution that's fair to these young immigrants. If we don't pass this bill, these young immigrants, the dreamers, the DACA recipients, could lose all of their protections in a matter of months. Now, we don't have to get into why or how that happened. We know that there's some court challenges out there, but that's the reality. That's what we're dealing with today. In addition to that, we've all spoken out against this tragedy of children being separated at the border and the difficult position that the current and the previous administration were in of having to choose between enforcing our immigration laws and separating families. Yes, the Obama administration planned and started detaining families together until a court told them that they could not. And now we have a true tragedy on our hands. This bill would also help solve that issue. In addition to that, we modernize our immigration laws by making sure that our economy's needs are met. Now, the alternative is to vote no and to double down on the status quo, a failed, broken immigration system that has created so many victims over the years, from the small children who get abused by the human traffickers to the young immigrants in our country who discovered one day that they were undocumented, to drug trafficking at the border that's poisoning so many people in our country. A vote against this bill is a vote for that status quo. And I don't think anyone in this chamber supports the status quo on immigration. So I respectfully ask my colleagues, I know this bill isn't perfect. This isn't the bill I would have drafted. My bill is the Recognizing America's Children Act. That's the bill that I drafted and that I would prefer. But there's 435 of us in this chamber. And sometimes we have to meet somewhere, meet in the middle, compromise. And let's not let this time be like it always is on immigration, where everyone says, unless I can get 100% of what I want, no one's going to get anything. And that might be easy for us to say here in this chamber, but that isn't something easy for people to hear, for the American people, for young immigrants brought to our country, for the DACA population. That isn't easy for them to hear. They want to hear that we're going to find a way to get to yes, and that although our solution might not be perfect, it will leave us at a place better than the one we're in today. So that's why I respectfully ask all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to strongly consider supporting this legislation that will leave our country much better off than it is today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman, nice.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a report by the Cato Institute titled House GOP Bill Cuts Legal Immigration by 1.4 million over 20 years.
Without objection.
Thank you.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, and the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, will each control 10 minutes. The chair recognizes from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
It's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
House be in order.
Mr. Speaker, there's been a lot of talk about children. I'm the father of 5 children. This bill will keep families together, not separated, as exists under current law. This bill changes that law so that the Department of Homeland Security can keep family units together. I talked to the secretary today. She told me there are 12,000 children in these detention centers. I think it's important that we be transparent with the American people about the facts. 10,000 of these children did not come in with their parents. 10,000 of these children made the dangerous journey through Central America, through Mexico, and up into the United States with their guardian as the coyote, the human smuggler, the human trafficker. The dangerous journey. Many of them abused and exploited along the way. I've been to the detention centers, and it's heartbreaking to see these kids. This bill provides a deterrent to stop this. In sum, Mr. Speaker, this bill protects the children. You know, as a federal prosecutor in Texas, I saw the threats coming from the United States southern border, the drug traffickers, the human traffickers, the MS-13, the opioids that we've been talking about all week, precursors coming from China, into Mexico, bringing heroin and opioids into the United States, killing thousands of Americans. The violence, the destruction, that's why we need a secure border. And we've been talking about this for a long time on both sides of the aisle. You know, Hillary Clinton talked about we need a secure border. Barack Obama talked about we need a secure border. Now we have a president who I think is serious about securing our border. This bill does many things, but it sticks to the 4 pillars we talked about in the White House. Border security, by building a wall barrier system, technology, and personnel. The visa lottery system, a random lottery system, to go more merit-based, to bring in talent rather than a random system. Chain migration is reduced, so that's not just based on family, but rather on merit. And then finally, we provide the solution for DACA. We legalize the DACA kids. We give them legal status to stay in the United States. I don't understand why my colleagues on the other side of the aisle can't support that. But I want to talk about, as my role as chairman of Homeland Security, why I think this border protection is so important. This is a map, special interest aliens pathway into the United States. 2,000 special interest aliens are apprehended trying to make their way into the United States every year. Special interest means special interest countries coming from the Middle East, from Africa, terror hotspots coming into our hemisphere and going up into the United States. The 9/11 Commission talked about this. They said before 9/11, no agency of the United States government systematically analyzed terrorist travel strategies. Had they done so, they could have discovered the ways in which the terrorist predecessors to Al-Qaeda have been systematically but detectably exploiting weaknesses in our border security since the early 1990s. Just recently, Secretary Nielsen testified that she said, "We have also seen ISIS in written materials encourage ISIS followers to cross our southwest border, given the loopholes that they are aware of." We heard from Admiral Hendrickson, the U.S. Southern Command Admiral, say, some of these people attempting to cross our borders have ties to terrorism, and some have intentions to conduct attacks in the homeland. And then this one. A recently declassified CIA report written in 2003 says specific information at the time demonstrates Al-Qaeda's ongoing interest to enter the United States over land borders with Mexico and Canada. And then they also reported it by the CIA. This is the CIA reporting. Bin Laden apparently sought operatives with valid Mexican passports. The Secretary went on to say, "We are identifying and stopping terror suspects who would otherwise have gone undetected. In fact, on average, my department now stops 10 known or suspected terrorists a day, not a year. 10 known terror suspects a day from entering into the United States." I think it's time we get this done. It's my last year as chairman of this committee, and I want to end it with providing the American people the security that they deserve. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this fake DACA bill, a bill that we just found out 10 minutes ago that we're not going to even vote on tomorrow. And so all of this time, all of the comments we've heard from the other side about how important it is for us to do our work, well, they've now decided it must not be too important. We're not going to vote on it. So again, this is a fake DACA bill, and obviously someone has lost their nerve because we're not going to even vote on it. So I have trouble believing that President Trump did not know that his unilateral decision to implement the zero tolerance policy in April would result in thousands of children being ripped from their parents' arms. Over the past 6 weeks, Americans have grown more and more alarmed by the images and voices of children who, with little or no warning or explanation, were separated from their loving parents. For weeks, both the President and Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen, repeatedly refused to accept responsibility for creating this humanitarian disaster. They blamed our immigration laws. They blamed the Democrats. They blamed Congress. They blamed parents for taking the dangerous journey north to seek haven for themselves and their children. None of this was true. The lies did not fly. That dog didn't hunt. This past weekend, several of us in the Democratic caucus flew down to the border to see for ourselves what was happening to the families. The president, seeing the news stories of suffering children and families, succumbed to his base desire for better press and finally acknowledged what we all know. He is responsible for the family separation crisis. The executive order he signed yesterday doubled down on zero tolerance and provides no relief to the families that have been separated. Like the executive order, H.R. 6136 does not resolve the family separation crisis. It does not stop CBP's unfettered ability to separate families in various situations, including for those seeking asylum at ports of entry. The solution H.R. 6136 offers is to detain children indefinitely with their parents while they wait to be prosecuted in facilities that do not have to comply with court-ordered requirements for clean drinking water, toilets, and medical assistance. It ignores the 2016 findings of the Department of Homeland Security's own advisory committee that studied the question of family detention. In it, the experts concluded that family detention is neither appropriate nor necessary for families, and that it is never in the best interest of children. Mr. Speaker, it's time for Congress to take a stand against the cruel, inhumane immigration enforcement policies of the Trump administration. By voting down H.R. 6136, we can send a strong message to the President to stop family separation. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers, and I am prepared to close at this time.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'll be brief. Many members came into this week expecting to consider and vote a measure that trades border wall funding for a dreamer fix. H.R. 6136 is not that bill. This legislation would compel the expenditure of billions of taxpayers' dollars for decades to come on an unnecessary border wall, while maintaining the cruel zero-tolerance policy, limiting access to asylum, shrinking legal immigration, ending the diversity visa lottery program, and abolishing protections for unaccompanied children. There's nothing pro-family or pro-security about this bill. This is a fake DACA bill. No hearings, no witnesses, no stakeholder engagement, no markup, not even an CBO score. And now we find at this hour that we've been debating a bill that we won't even vote on tomorrow. I wonder why. It's probably because some other people have found out that this is a fake DACA bill and probably not worth the paper it's printed on. But we shall see. For these reasons, I urge a no and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In closing, I'd just like to, I know this is an emotional topic, and I think both sides have what they think are the best interests of the American people in their heart. I feel like the Constitution drives me to protect the American people, and that's my most solemn, highest responsibility. And I just want to close with a quote from our Secretary of Homeland Security. She said, the only people who benefit from the immigration system right now are the smugglers, the traffickers, those who are peddling drugs, and terrorists. So let's fix the system. Mr. Speaker, I agree with her. Let's fix the system. Let's protect the American people. And with that, I yield back.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 953, the previous question is ordered on the bill. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend the immigration laws and provide for border security and for other purposes.
Pursuant to Clause 1C of Rule 19, further consideration of H.R. 6136 is postponed.